The first thing Lucas became aware of was the cold, sterile air on his skin, followed by a deep, throbbing ache in his body that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. His eyelids felt heavy, glued shut by exhaustion, and whatever strange force had drained him of energy. His mind was sluggish, struggling to make sense of the disjointed fragments of memory swirling in the fog of unconsciousness. His ship malfunctioning, the emergency alarms, the sensation of falling, and then nothing. Gradually, his senses returned, and he forced his eyes open, squinting against the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. The room around him was sleek and metallic, with curved walls that gleamed under the stark illumination. There was a low hum of machinery, and strange symbols, nothing he recognized, flickered on a nearby console. Everything looked and felt utterly alien. A surge of panic shot through him. Where am I? Lucas tried to move but found his body heavy, sluggish, as if weighed down by invisible chains. His arms and legs refused to cooperate, sending dull protests of pain each time he attempted to shift. He was lying on a medical bed, his limbs barely covered by a thin sheet. His heart raced as he struggled to push himself up, the cold metal pressing against his back a sharp reminder that he was far from home. "Easy," a soft voice spoke from somewhere in the room. "You've been through a lot." The voice was smooth and melodic, carrying a calm authority that for a moment cut through Lucas' panic. He turned his head slowly, every movement a painful effort. His eyes landed on the source of the voice, and his breath caught in his throat. Standing at the foot of the bed was a woman, or at least something like a woman. She was tall, statuesque, with sleek silver hair that shimmered as it fell in waves down her back. Her skin was a pale blue, almost luminescent, glowing softly under the light. A fitted white medical uniform clung to her curvaceous figure, emphasizing her graceful form. But it was her eyes that captivated him most. They were large and violet, glowing faintly with an intensity that seemed to pierce through him, as if she could read the very thoughts racing through his mind. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lucas felt his heart race, unsure whether to feel fear or awe. She looked human, almost, but there was something undeniably alien about her, something that both fascinated and unsettled him. I'm sorry," he choked, his voice rough and dry. "Who are you? Where am I?" The alien woman tilted her head slightly, her violet eyes narrowing in thought. "You're in the medical bay of Calx 9, a research station orbiting the star Vega," she said evenly, though there was a hint of curiosity in her tone. "I'm Celine, the chief xenobiologist here." Calx 9. The name stirred something in Lucas' mind. He had read about it before, in an obscure corner of the Deep Space Archives. It was one of the most advanced research facilities in the quadrant, known for its cutting-edge work on xenobiology and alien genetics. But why was he here? Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to sit up, his muscles trembling with the effort. His vision blurred, and he blinked hard to focus. What happened to me? How did I get here? Celine stepped closer, her gaze assessing him with a clinical detachment that only made the situation feel more surreal. "Your ship was found drifting in space near the debris field outside Vega's orbit. It was heavily damaged, and you were barely alive when our patrols picked you up. Radiation exposure, dehydration, multiple fractures. Honestly, it's a miracle you survived." Lucas swallowed hard. It sounded bad, but it didn't explain the gnawing feeling in his gut, the sense that something was missing from this story. "I don't remember much," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Just that everything went wrong all at once." Celine nodded, her expression softening slightly. "That's to be expected. You were in a coma for nearly 2 weeks. Your body is still recovering from the trauma. I'm surprised you're even awake." As she spoke, Lucas's eyes drifted down to the sheet that barely covered his body. He was wearing nothing but a thin medical gown, the kind that left little to the imagination. His face flushed with embarrassment as he realized just how exposed he was, and he instinctively pulled the sheet higher, his movement still sluggish. Celine noticed, and though her face remained impassive, there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "Don't worry," she said, her voice light. "You're in a medical bay. Modesty isn't exactly a priority here." Lucas's mind raced, still struggling to process everything, but a wry smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "So you're telling me an alien nurse saw me naked in my unconscious state?" Celine blinked, clearly caught off guard by his remark. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Technically, I'm not a nurse, she replied, a trace of humor in her voice. I'm a xenobiologist. And it wasn't just me. There were plenty of scans involved. Lucas couldn't help but laugh, though it came out as more of a dry chuckle. The absurdity of the situation was finally starting to sink in. Here he was, stranded on an alien space station, having narrowly escaped death, and now he was making jokes about being exposed to an alien woman. If the situation hadn't been so dire, it might have been funny. Right, Lucas said, shaking his head. Good to know you didn't just pull up a chair and watch the show. Celine's violet eyes sparkled with amusement. You were unconscious the whole time, I assure you. It was all very professional. Lucas felt the heat in his cheeks rising, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. Well, that's a relief. Celine stepped closer, her expression softening as she studied him. You should rest, she said, her tone shifting back to something more serious. Your body has been through a lot, and you're still not fully healed. We've done what we can, but you'll need time to recover. Lucas nodded, though the ache in his body made it clear that he wasn't in any shape to argue. He let his head fall back against the pillow, closing his eyes for a moment. The soft hum of the medical equipment filled the silence, and for the first time since waking up, he allowed himself to breathe. But even as exhaustion pulled at him, questions swirled in his mind. How had his ship ended up here, near Vega of all places? And why couldn't he remember what had happened before everything went dark? Celine, Lucas said, his voice low. What else do you know about how I got here? There was a pause, and Lucas could sense her hesitation. When she spoke, her voice was softer, more guarded. We found something in your ship's data logs. It's strange. There were energy readings, signatures we've never seen before. Whatever hit you wasn't just a malfunction. Lucas's eyes snapped open. What do you mean? Celine's gaze grew more intense, her violet eyes narrowing slightly. We're still trying to figure it out, but it's as if your ship passed through some kind of rift, something outside the normal parameters of space and time. Lucas's heart raced. He had read about rifts, about anomalies in the fabric of space that could transport ships to unknown regions of the galaxy, or worse, to alternate dimensions. But he had never imagined he would experience one firsthand. What does that mean for me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Celine hesitated again, her gaze shifting as if she were weighing her words carefully. It means you may not be where you think you are, or when. Lucas felt a cold knot of fear form in his chest. He had suspected something was wrong, but this was worse than he had imagined. If he was truly lost in time and space, cut off from everything he knew, then he was more alone than he could have ever realized. Celine seemed to sense his fear, and she took a step closer, her expression softening. We're going to figure this out, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You're not alone, Lucas. I'll help you. Her words were a lifeline in the swirling chaos of his thoughts, and Lucas clung to them, grateful for the reassurance. Despite everything, despite the strangeness of his situation and the uncertainty that loomed ahead, there was something in her voice, in the way she looked at him, that made him believe her. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Celine's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. Rest now, she said softly. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Lucas nodded, letting the tension in his body ease as exhaustion finally claimed him. As his eyes fluttered shut, he couldn't help but think about the strange, beautiful alien woman who had seen him at his most vulnerable. And despite the gravity of his situation, a part of him couldn't help but feel that his story, whatever it was just beginning. Over the next few days, Lucas's body slowly began to recover, but his mind was far from settled. He remained confined to the sterile confines of the medical bay on Calx 9, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of confusion, curiosity, and a mounting connection to Celine, the enigmatic xenobiologist whose presence both comforted and unsettled him. From the moment he first woke up to find her standing at the foot of his bed, her strange beauty had captured his attention. There was something about her that was both alien and familiar, a combination that made Lucas's heart race each time she entered the room. Her pale blue skin, violet eyes, and shimmering hair might have set her apart from anything he had ever known. But there was an intensity in her gaze, a quiet understanding that seemed to transcend their differences. As Celine monitored his progress, running diagnostics and adjusting the various machines that kept him stabilized, Lucas found himself drawn to her more and more. Each encounter with her was charged with an underlying tension, a crackling electricity that he couldn't explain. There was something about the way she looked at him, something in the way her fingers lingered just a little too long on his skin when she checked his vitals. It was as if she were as curious about him as he was about her, and that curiosity felt as much personal as it was professional. Yet despite the growing bond between them, there remained a barrier, something unspoken but deeply felt that neither of them had yet addressed. Lucas could sense that there was more to his being here, more than just the medical scans and the strange energy readings. Selene knew more than she was letting on. But every time he tried to ask, she would evade, her face growing guarded, her professional mask slipping back into place. One evening, after another long day of tests, Lucas decided he couldn't take it anymore. He had to know the truth. Not just about what had happened to his ship and how he had ended up here, but about the connection he felt growing between them. He waited until Selene had finished adjusting the med scanner and was preparing to leave for the night. "Selene," he called, his voice low but steady. She paused at the doorway, her hand hovering over the control panel that would slide the door shut. Her violet eyes flickered with a brief hesitation before she turned to face him. "Yes, Lucas?" she asked, her voice calm and measured. Lucas took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "You've been taking care of me for days now, and I appreciate everything you've done. But I need to know, what aren't you telling me? I can feel it. You know more than you're letting on." There was a long, tense silence between them. Selene's expression shifted, her calm facade faltering for a brief moment. Her violet eyes searched his, as if she were weighing the consequences of whatever she was about to say. Finally, she sighed, stepping away from the door and moving closer to the bed. Her posture softened as she stood at the foot of the bed, her hands clasped in front of her, as if trying to steady herself. "You're right," she admitted quietly. "There are things I haven't told you, things I'm not sure I even fully understand myself." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. He had expected her to deny it, to brush off his question with more vague reassurances. But her admission, her vulnerability in this moment, caught him off guard. He sat up a little straighter, the ache in his muscles forgotten. "Then tell me," he urged. "I need to know what's really going on." Selene's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment, as if she were gathering her thoughts, deciding how much to reveal. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, tinged with an emotion that Lucas couldn't quite place. "When we found you, you weren't just injured. There was something else," she began, her eyes lifting to meet his again. "Something strange in your biology. At first, I thought it was just the result of the radiation exposure and the trauma from your crash. But the more tests I ran, the more I realized that you're not like any human we've ever encountered." Lucas's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Selene hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the bed as if to anchor herself. "Your DNA, it's different. There are anomalies in your genetic structure that we can't explain. It's almost as if you've been altered somehow, though we don't know by what or how." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. Altered? That made no sense. He had been a simple pilot, a human like any other, with no history of genetic modification or tampering. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you saying I'm not human?" "No, you are human," Selene clarified quickly, her tone reassuring. "But there's something in your physiology that doesn't fit, something extraordinary. Your cells regenerate at a rate far beyond anything we've seen, and your neural patterns." She broke off, biting her lip as if unsure how much further to go. "And my neural patterns," Lucas pressed, his curiosity now fully piqued. Selene took a deep breath, her violet eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his heart race. "They're synchronized with mine," she said softly. "When you're awake, I can feel you, sense your thoughts, your emotions. I've never experienced anything like it with another species before." Lucas's pulse quickened. That strange connection he had felt between them, the unspoken pull, the way her presence seemed to settle the chaos in his mind. It wasn't just in his imagination. It was real, tangible, something that went far beyond simple attraction. "How was that possible?" Lucas asked, struggling to wrap his mind around what she was saying. "I've never been telepathic. Hell, I didn't even know telepathy was possible." "It shouldn't be," Selene admitted, her voice filled with a mixture of wonder and concern. "At least not between our species. Telepathic bonds like this are rare even among my kind, and they usually only occur between individuals who are deeply connected, emotionally, spiritually." Lucas stared at her, his mind racing. A telepathic bond between them. He had felt the pull, the strange way her presence seemed to echo inside him, but he hadn't realized just how deep it went. "And what does that mean for us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Celine's eyes softened, her expression becoming almost vulnerable. I don't know, she admitted. I've never experienced anything like this before. But I do know that whatever is happening between us, it's not just a random occurrence. There's something about you, about us, that's special. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the air between them charged with an intensity that made Lucas's skin tingle. The walls of the medical bay seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, connected by something unseen but undeniably powerful. Lucas, Celine said softly, her voice trembling slightly. When I look at you, I don't just see a patient or a stranger. I feel like I've known you for longer than this moment, like we've crossed paths before in some other life. Her words sent a shiver down Lucas's spine, and he felt a deep, instinctual pull toward her. It was as if her voice was calling to something buried deep within him, something ancient and primal. I feel it too, Lucas admitted, his voice rough with emotion. From the moment I woke up, I felt connected to you. I couldn't explain it, but it was there, like I've been waiting for this, waiting for you. Celine's eyes shimmered with emotion, and for the first time since Lucas had arrived on Colts 9, her professional mask slipped completely. She looked at him, not as a scientist or a doctor, but as a woman standing on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful. Slowly, as if pulled by an invisible force, Celine took a step closer to him. Lucas's heart raced as she moved toward the bed, her presence enveloping him like a warm current. When she reached him, she hesitated for just a moment, her violet eyes searching his as if asking for permission. Lucas didn't hesitate. He reached for her, his hand gently brushing against her arm. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of energy surged through him, and he felt her emotions flood into his mind. Curiosity, fear, longing. It was overwhelming, and yet it felt right, as if this was what he had been missing all along. Celine, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was tentative at first, almost hesitant, as if neither of them was sure if this was real. But then the kiss deepened, and all the tension, all the unspoken feelings between them ignited in a rush of heat and desire. Lucas's heart pounded as he pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her silvery hair. He could feel her emotions as if they were his own. Her fear of what this connection meant, her hope that it could be something more, her undeniable need for him. And in that moment, everything else faded away. There was no shipwreck, no medical bay, no questions of time and space. There was only Celine, and the way she made him feel alive in a way he had never felt before. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing heavily, their foreheads pressed together as they tried to steady themselves. I don't know what's happening to us, Lucas murmured, his voice still shaky from the intensity of the kiss. But I don't care. All I know is that I don't want it to stop. Celine smiled softly, her eyes still filled with wonder. Neither do I. In that moment, Lucas realized that whatever had brought him to Colts 9, whatever strange forces had altered his body and connected him to this place and this woman, it didn't matter. All that mattered was the bond they shared, a connection unlike anything he had ever known, a connection that transcended the boundaries of species, time, and space. And he knew deep down that this was only the beginning. In the days following their kiss, the already strange and surreal atmosphere on Colts 9 grew even more charged for Lucas and Celine. The station's sleek, metallic walls seemed to hum with a new energy, as if they too could sense the unspoken connection that now threaded between the two of them. For Lucas, what had once been a vague, unsettling sense of displacement had now sharpened into a focused determination to uncover the truth. And at the center of that truth was Celine, the alien scientist who had not only saved his life, but awakened something profound within him, something he couldn't fully explain, but which he could no longer ignore. Celine, for her part, remained outwardly calm, though Lucas could feel the subtle shifts in her demeanor. When they were alone in the medical bay or walking through the quieter corridors of the station, her violet eyes would linger on him a fraction longer. Her touch on his arm or shoulder would send a current of warmth through him. But despite the growing closeness between them, there was still something she wasn't telling him, something that hung between them like an invisible wall. Lucas had questions, far more than he could count, and Celine had promised answers. But the answers, when they came, were fragmented and incomplete. She spoke of his altered physiology, of the strange anomalies in his DNA, but never quite explained how or why they had appeared. There was always a sense that she was holding back, that the truth she carried was far more complex and dangerous than either of them were ready to confront. One evening, as they sat together in a small observation lounge on the station, looking out at the vast expanse of stars beyond, Lucas decided he could no longer wait for the truth to come to him. He had to press for it. Celine had been kind, even vulnerable with him, but she was also a scientist, someone trained to observe, to analyze, to withhold conclusions until the data was complete. Lucas wasn't sure if her hesitation was due to uncertainty, or if she feared what revealing too much might mean for them both. The room was quiet, save for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Through the massive viewport, the endless black sea of space stretched out before them, dotted with stars that seemed impossibly distant. The observation lounge was sparsely furnished, with low, comfortable chairs and dim lighting that cast long shadows across the floor. Celine sat across from Lucas, her posture relaxed, but her gaze distant, as if she were lost in thought. "Celine," Lucas began, breaking the silence. "I need you to tell me everything. No more half-truths or evasions. You know more about what's happening to me than you've let on. I can feel it." Celine's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, a shadow of doubt crossed her face. She looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of the table between them. "Lucas, it's not that simple," she said quietly. "There are things I don't fully understand myself, things I'm still trying to figure out." "Then tell me what you do know," Lucas pressed, leaning forward in his chair. "I deserve to know the truth. You said there was something about me, something unusual in my DNA. But that's not all, is it? There's more, isn't there?" Celine was silent for a long time, her violet eyes focused on the stars outside the window. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "We've never seen anyone like you before, Lucas. Not just in your physiology, but in your energy. Your presence here is affecting the station, the readings. It's like the universe itself is reacting to you in ways we don't fully understand." Lucas frowned, his heart racing. "Reacting to me? How?" Celine stood, walking over to the viewport, her hands resting on the cool glass as she stared out at the distant stars. "It's hard to explain," she said, her voice distant. "The anomalies we detected when we first brought you aboard, they weren't just from your ship. They were coming from you. There are energy signatures, disturbances in the fabric of space-time that seem to be connected to your presence. It's as if you've been touched by something beyond our understanding." Lucas's mind reeled. The idea that he could be causing some kind of cosmic disruption seemed absurd, but the look on Celine's face told him that she was completely serious. "Are you saying I'm some kind of walking rift?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Celine turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. "Not exactly, but something happened to you, something that altered you at a fundamental level. We've seen energy readings like this before, but only in theoretical models, never in a living being." Lucas stood, pacing the room as he tried to process what she was telling him. "But how? I don't understand. I was just a pilot, working a standard job. I've never been near any anomalies, never encountered anything like this. How could I have been changed?" Celine shook her head, her expression troubled. "I don't know. That's what we've been trying to figure out. Your ship's logs were corrupted, and whatever happened before you arrived here, there's no record of it. But there's something else." She hesitated, biting her lip as if unsure whether to continue. Lucas stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on her. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tense. Celine took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "You weren't the only one affected. The energy signatures, they're not just coming from you. They're resonating with me." Lucas felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. "What?" "When I'm near you, the readings spike. It's like we're connected somehow, beyond the telepathy, beyond the bond we felt. Whatever changed you is affecting me too. I've been trying to keep it contained, to monitor it, but it's getting stronger." The revelation hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. The connection he had felt with Celine, the pull, the unspoken bond that had drawn them together. It wasn't just an emotional or telepathic link. It was something deeper, something that was altering the very fabric of reality around them. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Lucas asked, his voice tight with frustration. Celine's gaze dropped to the floor. "Because I wasn't sure what it meant," she admitted. "And because I was afraid of what it might mean for us, for you." Lucas crossed the room in 2 quick strides, stopping just inches from her. "Celine, we can't keep running from this. If there's something bigger at play here, we need to face it together." Her eyes lifted to meet his, And in that moment, the vulnerability in her expression was almost heartbreaking. She nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. You're right. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them like a physical force. Then, without warning, the lights in the room flickered, dimming for a split second before returning to their normal brightness. Lucas froze. What the hell was that? Celine's face paled. The station, she murmured. The energy. It's spiking again. Before either of them could react, the station's intercom crackled to life, the voice of the station's commander echoing through the room. All personnel report to your stations immediately. We're detecting an energy surge in the vicinity of the research wing. All non-essential personnel proceed to designated safety zones. Lucas's heart raced as he looked at Celine. Is this because of me? Celine shook her head, her expression grim. I don't know, but we need to get to the research wing. Now. Without another word, they rushed out of the observation lounge and into the corridors of the station. The halls were filled with a low, pulsing hum, and Lucas could feel the air around him growing thick with an almost tangible energy. It was as if the station itself was vibrating, reacting to something unseen. As they made their way toward the research wing, Lucas's mind raced. If what Celine had said was true, if his presence here was causing these anomalies, then the stakes were far higher than he had ever imagined. Whatever had altered him, whatever had brought him to Colts 9, wasn't just a random accident. It was part of something much larger, something that was now affecting the station, and possibly the entire sector. When they finally arrived at the research wing, the sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. In the center of the main lab, a massive swirling vortex of energy had formed, crackling with electric arcs that shot out in all directions. Scientists and technicians scrambled to contain the surge, their faces pale with fear and confusion. It's getting worse. One of the technicians called out, his voice strained. We're losing control of the containment field. Celine immediately took charge, moving to the nearest control console and accessing the station systems. We need to stabilize the field, she said, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. Lucas, I need you to. Before she could finish, the vortex pulsed violently, sending a shockwave through the room that knocked several scientists off their feet. Lucas stumbled, barely managing to stay upright as the energy surge intensified. We don't have much time, Celine shouted over the roar of the vortex. If we don't contain this, it could rip the station apart. Lucas's mind raced as he tried to think of a solution. There had to be a way to stop this, something they hadn't tried yet. And then, in a sudden flash of clarity, it came to him. The connection between him and Celine, the energy that had been building between them. It was the key. Celine, Lucas shouted, moving toward her. The energy between us is resonating with the vortex. We can use it to stabilize the field. Celine's eyes widened in realization. You're right. If we can channel the energy, we might be able to neutralize the surge. Without hesitation, they moved to the center of the lab, standing side by side as the vortex crackled and swirled around them. Lucas reached for Celine's hand, and the moment their fingers intertwined, he felt the energy surge through him, stronger than ever before. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt right, like this was what they had been meant to do all along. Together, they focused their minds, channeling the energy between them toward the vortex. The room grew brighter, the arcs of electricity flashing faster and more violently. But instead of destabilizing, the vortex began to calm, its swirling mass slowing as the energy stabilized. Keep going, Celine urged, her voice steady despite the intensity of the moment. We're almost there. With one final surge of concentration, the vortex collapsed in on itself, disappearing in a flash of light. The room fell silent, the only sound the soft hum of the station systems returning to normal. Lucas and Celine stood in the center of the lab, still holding hands, their hearts racing. The danger had passed, but the implications of what had just happened were undeniable. Whatever force had brought them together, whatever had altered Lucas, was far more powerful than they had imagined. As they stood there, catching their breath, Lucas knew that this was just the beginning. After the chaos of the energy surge in the research wing, the station gradually returned to a sense of uneasy calm. The vortex had disappeared, but the weight of what had happened, what had nearly torn the station apart, still lingered in the air. For Lucas and Celine, the experience had not only revealed the power of their connection, but had deepened the bond between them in ways they hadn't anticipated. They had faced something inexplicable and terrifying together, and in doing so, they had discovered that their connection was far more than just physical attraction or emotional chemistry. It was something profound, something that transcended the boundaries of space, species, and reason. As they stood together in the quiet aftermath, their fingers still intertwined, Lucas could feel the lingering energy of the vortex strumming between them. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. He felt alive, more alive than he had ever felt before, as if every part of his being had been awakened by the connection they had just shared. He turned to Celine, her violet eyes glowing softly in the dim light of the lad. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was charged, not with danger this time, but with something far more intimate. "We did it," Lucas said softly, his voice breaking the silence. Celine nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "We did," she whispered, though her voice trembled slightly, as if she too were overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just transpired. "I don't understand how. How could we? How could this stop something so powerful?" Lucas shook his head, his mind still reeling from the experience. "I don't know, but I can feel it, Celine. There's something about us, something about this bond we share. It's like we're connected on a level I can't explain. It's not just telepathy, it's deeper than that." Celine took a step closer to him, her fingers tightening around his. "I've never experienced anything like this before," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not with anyone, not even with others of my species. I've always thought of myself as separate, but with you, it's different." Lucas's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. He could see it in her eyes. This was as frightening for her as it was for him. She had spent her life studying the unknown, probing the mysteries of alien biology and the universe itself. But this, what was happening between them, was something even she couldn't analyze or quantify. It was beyond science, beyond logic, and yet it was undeniable. Without thinking, Lucas reached up and gently cupped her face in his hand. Her skin was cool to the touch, smooth and soft, and the moment their skin made contact, that familiar surge of warmth coursed through him. It was as if their very beings were drawn to one another, as if they were two halves of the same whole, finally coming together after lifetimes apart. "Celine," he murmured, his thumb brushing gently across her cheek. "I don't care what this is or why it's happening. All I know is that I've never felt like this before, not for anyone." Her eyes shimmered with emotion, and for a brief moment, Lucas thought he saw tears gathering at the edges of her violet irises. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes as if savoring the connection between them. "I don't want to fight it anymore," she whispered, her voice